Now, along the way here, we've been doing some things with column names that have been kind of interesting, and I want to highlight them. So here's the first query on this screen, where in the select clause, we talk about sailors.sid. And that's important because both the sailors table and the reserves table had a column called SID. So we need to distinguish which SID column we're talking about. We do that by saying sailors.sid. So sailors is what's called a range variable here. It tells us that we're ranging over the tuples of the sailors table. And for the tuples of the sailors table, we want that SID column. SName is unambiguously from the sailors table because there is no SName in the reserves table. Similarly, BID is unambiguously from the reserves table because there's no BID in the sailors table. So for those, it's optional whether we put the range variable, which is to say the table name, in front of SName or BID. And then in the where clause, again, you can see we're being careful to distinguish SID from sailors with SID from reserves and saying that we're comparing one to the other. Now the second query on the screen is actually the same query written slightly differently, where we've given each of sailors and reserves an alias for its range variable. So for the sailors range variable, we're going to alias it to the letter capital S, and for reserves, we're going to alias it to the letter capital R. By the way, whether it's capital or not does not matter in SQL. Okay, so we have this query select s.sid now. That still unambiguously says we're talking about the SID in the sailors table. We're going to leave sname and BID without range variables. And in the where clause, we can say s.sid equals r.sid. And this saves us some typing, right? We don't have to keep typing out these long table names. We can use these short aliases. Now we can also use aliases in the output. And this query is interesting in two ways. First of all, look at the from clause. We're joining sailors with itself. Seems kind of strange. So we have sailors as x and sailors as y, two different range variables over the same table. And what we're doing is we're comparing x sailor tuples to y sailor tuples, where the x sailor tuples have an age greater than the y sailor tuple. So I want pairs of sailors, where on the left-hand side, the sailor is older than the sailor on the right-hand side. And then from those two sailors, I want the sname and age from the left-hand side, the sname and age from the right-hand side. But look at that select list. We've also got aliases there where we're renaming the output columns so that we can distinguish them. The answer to this query is in the upper right. Popeye is older than Bob, olive oil is older than Popeye, and so on. And notice that the column names in the output have been specified according to the aliases in the select list. So we can alias range variables in the from clause, and we can alias column names in the select list. And notice that we had to use table aliases in the from clause here because we were doing this self-join. Sailors was being joined with itself, and we needed to know which instance of sailors we were talking about in our where clause, x.age greater than y.age.